Welcome to Shop Talk Live, Fine Woodworking Magazine's bi-weekly podcast. I'm senior web producer Ed Pernick, and joining me today are senior projects editor Asa Christiana.
What's up?
And senior editor Matt Kenny.
Hello.
You sound so excited, Matt. I'm pleased to be here. Let's proceed.
I'm always mentioned last.
You are?
Always.
Well, it's by who has been here the longest.
Is it?
That's how I do it.
I've been here longer than you have.
Yeah, but I'm the host. Well, you go before me. Oh no, I'm the host. That doesn't apply to me.
Someday when I'm not around anymore,
Listen,
Matt, you'll move up the ladder.
The two of you, be quiet.
All right.
As always, if you like this podcast, and I hope you do, be sure to spread the word to your fellow woodworkers. Stop by our iTunes page, leave a cool comment, maybe a 5-star rating, and you can also catch us on iHeartRadio. But make sure you spread the word on your Facebook pages, everywhere. I want our numbers to get bigger and better.
World domination.
That's right. In a world where woodworking has been banned, one podcast
survives.
In a world where Shop Talk Live
sound.
In a world where Shop Talk Live dominates, there's only 5 people in that world. And 3 of them.
5. You're being generous.
3 of them are on the show.
Anyhow, listen. Segue topic for this week. I got a rather lengthy email from a guy named John who says, I've heard several times your team disrespect radial arm saws, so I thought it might make sense to try to mount a defense.
We only disrespect West Coast radial arm saws.
There you go. My father has owned a radial arm saw for his entire adult life. I owned one when I got my first house. In both cases, our initial decision to buy was economic. He was the father of a large family. I was just starting out my life, blah, 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 blah. John goes out to put some bullet points in here. It can be operated in a very limited space. My father's workshop has been in small rooms and basements of the various houses he has owned. He never had the luxury to spread out to a larger shop that could accommodate a table saw plus a bandsaw. In these workshops, he used the saw to create most of the functional furniture a growing family needs. Bullet 2. It can be carried up and down steps by one person, allowing him to use it as a very functional job site saw to help build significant additions to his houses.
Lou Ferrigno can carry a radial arm saw up and down stairs.
Yeah, I'm not going to try that one. But all right, maybe he has a smaller model or something. Yeah. Bullet point 3. It can perform cross cuts, rips, and dado cuts with little change over time. I realize that some people try to rip on a radial arm saw, but I mean, honestly, how long a piece can you really rip on a radial arm saw?
You can rip as long as you want. It's just
you can rip a 500 long foot piece, but you basically you turn the head sideways, right, and you run the piece down along the way that it normally would, where it would normally sit.
You run the piece instead of the head.
Yeah,
yes.
But the weird thing is that the teeth are pulling upward, and there's no support to hold that board down other than your hands. And it's a sketchy operation. I don't care what anyone says. Even if you did have some sort of splitter behind your blade, which is highly unlikely. Do most radial arm saws have a little splitter?
Yeah, they do.
They do?
At least mine does. I've never done that.
That's going to help a lot, is keep that splitter in place. But, Matt, you have a radial arm saw, and you use it like you use a chop saw, right?
Yeah. Were you done reading all the guys' bullet points?
Pretty much. I mean, it taught me to love woodworking. What more can you ask for from a tool? Throwaway line, John. Come on.
I was skipping that part.
I have a radial arm saw, and my dad has one. And the guy I learned to make furniture from had one in his shop. Yeah, Pappy Kenny.
Pappy Kenny.
I only use mine to cross-cut rough lumber. And sometimes, finished lumber if it's, it doesn't need to be too accurate. I found mine, once I get it dialed in at 90 degrees and just leave it, it's fine. I don't want to move it around too much. But you can, radial arm saws, they're versatile tools, and you can do all the stuff the guy said. You can do even more. Like mine in the manual came with instructions on how there was a spinning planer head that you would turn the cutter.
Well, you can attach a what now to the saw?
To the arbor. So you can rotate the cutting head so that it's parallel. So the saw blade would be parallel to the table.
This sounds perfectly safe.
And you take the saw blade out and you put some kind of cutter head on it to use as a planer.
Oh, my God.
there was a way that you could put a collet in it and use it as a router. All this crazy stuff.
Yeah, because you just need right angle gears to get around the corner and turn it.
Did you guys ever hear the story that, speaking about all these, like doing different operations with a tool, there's a story that I heard on Adam Carolla's podcast a long time ago about when he was building cabinets. He used to rent shop space late at night from a friend of his when the friend wasn't using it, for his business. He would rent it real cheap, so he'd be building cabinets until 2 o'clock in the morning. And one night he realized he had to drill a rather large hole with a spade bit. And now that starts another question. Why is he using a spade bit while building cabinets?
He was a carpenter.
But he was a carpenter. And he realized he didn't have his drill with him. So he's like, all right, what do I have here that I could repurpose as a drill?
A router?
A router.
Jeez.
And he said he chucked it up in the collet. He turned it on, and that thing just started and flew right off across the room, nearly killed him. One would think that you would know right off the bat that is not going to work out well.
I don't understand how the shank, there's a 1/4-inch shank adapter, and maybe that's what he stuck it into. And people do drill with routers. If you're making a workbench, by the way, that's a great way to.
But you're using a router bit.
You're using a plunge bit.
Sure, yeah, definitely. But you can drill holes with a router, maybe not with a spade
Not
bit.
with a spade bit.
Spade bits can't rotate that fast anyways.
Sticking out 8 inches from the.
My short-term
20,000 RPM.
My short-term memory is definitely getting worse. But I think the guy's question was about a radial arm saw.
Yeah. So let's go ahead, Asa.
He didn't have a question. He was just saying they're good.
We're
right?
just debating.
No. So let's talk about them. Let's talk about their pluses and minuses.
I've never been negative about radial arm saws. They're fantastic for cross-cutting.
I think where we have talked them down a little bit is when we talked about why the chop saw miter saw has taken over the marketplace. And I think those reasons, just to hit them real quick again, are that they're more lightweight. This guy claims these are portable, but a chop saw miter saw is far more lightweight than most radial arms. Also, they can quickly tilt the head over, tilt the head sideways. You can make all sorts of molding cuts with them. So they have some real advantages. Where a radial arm saw is great, really, it's a tool that really does one thing really well, and then you can force it to do other things. What it does really well, and this is why every lumberyard on earth has one sitting there, is if you keep it at 90, you can put any length board up onto the table and very safely and quickly
cross-cut it.
Make a cross-cut.
Yeah,
and that's what it does really well.
Mine cross-cuts up to like 20 inches.
Right.
Which is like amazing.
Right. So it has a really big cross-cut capacity. That's really what you're getting in a radial arm saw that you don't get in a miter saw, whatever. But trying to get it to do all those other things doesn't really make sense in a modern wood shop.
When you come down to it with a radial arm saw, is the truth about them is that no matter what you say you can do on a radial arm saw, there is a better way to do that operation with some other tool.
And if you're really trying to have like less machines in your shop, I'd go for the bandsaw. You can cut curves and straight line cuts and so many different kinds of cuts, all with that one machine. Resaw.
All right. Well, it also comes down to, what you grew up working with and what you got accustomed to. And this guy learned to work really well with a radial arm saw.
Yeah. And, but also on the podcast, when we're asked questions and we give answers, we think about everything that we know from personal experience or that we've learned through working at the magazine and try to give an answer that is the best way to do something.
Yeah.
And the answer to the question is never, the best way to do something is never the radial arm saw. Yeah. So maybe we have been down on it, but the truth is... disparaging. But the truth is, it's just not the best way to do things. And I understand that it might have been a good solution at the time for his father or for him, but,
And if you have one already, a lot of times the best machine is the one you have. So that's a really big point, is that you can have a lifetime of great woodworking just using the stuff that you have. We're in the catbird seat here, sort of talking about, we sort of act as if everything's at your disposal, but the truth is,
look at you guys in your ivory tower.
Exactly.
All right.
Well, as I always tell people that when they ask me about tools, I say, first you have to understand that I'm way further down the rabbit hole than the average person.
That's for sure. Than me.
All right. Let's head into our first question for this week, and it comes from John, who writes, inspired by fine woodworking, I am underway building Steve Latta's Federal side table. I need to start working on making the inlay banding. what is the best die to use to get the black layer, and how do I die it through its entire thickness so that when I slice off the layers after glue up, I don't have undyed wood? So I did a bit of cursory research on dyeing wood. And there are specific techniques for dyeing wood, but everything I read said that the most penetration you're going to get with all these methods I found online was like maybe a 16th of an inch. But there are two really easy things to do here.
This
Matt.
is one of those questions where the answers, we're not going to give the guy the answer he wants.
No, we're not.
Because the answer to the question is don't do that. Don't try to dye it because you're not going to. So the easiest thing to do would be to either break down and buy some ebony. You don't need much.
Which I'm guessing he doesn't feel like,
it's worth it. You're not going to buy a lot. So it's not like you're going to spend $500.
You're going to spend like
40,
$20.
Maybe
20. Yeah, I just bought some on Woodcraft.
All right, $20.
Yeah.
Or
not a sponsor, presently. You should be.
At different outlets, you can buy like maple that's stained black all the way through.
Pre-dyed. It's like almost like dyed veneers and things.
Yes, dyed veneers.
Yeah.
And that's all you need. So just do that because what he's proposing to do is he's not going to be able to do. And so don't.
I mean,
do
it's possible if you kept the inlay super flush to what you're putting it in, right?
But
you weren't going to remove much wood afterward.
But he would have to dye. What he wants to avoid is dyeing it each time he cuts a piece of stringing, which he's not. He's going to have to.
I would get the dyed veneer, dyed black veneer, which you can get at Woodcraft or Rockler or whatever,
or ebony.
Or ebony, better yet, if you're building a federal table.
Never. That's a great general piece of advice. I've never been sorry. Like in the moment, I've been like, "Oh my God, I just spent $800 on wood for those, for those two projects." But a year later, and 2 years later, and 10 years later, I'm never sorry that I did.
I mean, that's easy for you to say on a fine woodworking salary.
It's true.
You're earning the big bucks.
It's actually a lot harder than you would think to say on a woodworking salary.
We make fat stacks of cash.
And by fat stacks, we mean
rolls
of nickels.
Whenever I go to the lumberyard, I just make it rain.
Yeah.
At the lumberyard.
Matt carries a wad of rubber banded singles.
But this is an instance where you don't need actually a lot of wood.
No.
Yeah.
And it's not going to cost you a lot to buy the ebony.
No.
So if you can at all possible, just buy the ebony. Yeah. Or the second thing would be buy the pre-dyed stuff.
And you can get a super thin kerf, extra thin kerf blade. What some people do is load a thin kerf circ saw blade on their table saw because it's even thinner. And then you're getting a pretty much finished surface. Because you'd think, oh, why don't I bandsaw the ebony? That's a thin kerf. But then you're going to have to plane it. So possibly. So what I see a lot of people do is get a little circ saw blade that version of a thin kerf blade is super thin. And you could load that up in your table saw.
Did you guys ever see...
To not waste expensive material, sorry.
Did either of you ever see the job that Phil Lowe was working on last year, those ebony tables? Oh my gosh! So I don't know if we talked about this before.
Yeah,
a pair of solid ebony tables with like 22 karat gold leaf accents. I mean, real gold leaf. This was not the fake stuff. And then it had
Donald
a key
Trump
fob.
classy.
Yeah, well, it was insane, and I'd never seen that much solid ebony. And it had a key fob, and if you waved the key fob over the top of the tables retracted. Revealing the secret compartment. It was the coolest tables they were the coolest tables I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And they were a lot of money. I won't say how much, but they were many thousands of dollars each.
Well, probably tens of thousands. But he also once made a dining table out of Indian rosewood.
Yes.
And the lumber for that alone was like...
That was for somebody out there on Marblehead.
Like close to half my salary. Yeah. It was insane.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's like walking into George Nakashima's, the pole barn they have at Nakashima's compound. Some of the rosewood slabs and stuff back there in teak is like, that's been there since 1960.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you tried to buy it now.
Forget it.
Forget
it. And it's been carefully stored for 50 years. It's, God. Anyhow, so there you go. Next question comes from Mark, who writes, and this is a good one for you, Asa. In episode 3 of Tim Rousseau's pedestal dining table, Tim has several items attached to his miter gauge fence. The one farthest from the blade is clearly a stop. I can't figure out what the other two are for. Can you shed some light on this, please? So you
I know.
You were the producer on that video workshop
and
series.
I've worked with other people who had sliding miter saws, sliding table saws before, and they have that big giant crosscut fence on the sliding table.
Describe what he's got a Powermatic saw, but he has
some kind of sliding table on there.
an attachment.
And it's a lot like if you buy a table saw that is a sliding table saw. They both have a big, giant, long miter gauge, basically, that sits on top of the sliding table. And what I've seen more than one guy do is put a cup. They not only have a stop block on the end, but they also put a couple blocks on the front of the fence. And I believe that what that's for is I actually reached out to two guys I know who have this, and this morning, and was unable to get in touch with either of them. But I think what's going on there, I'm 90% sure, is that if you want to rough cut stock that doesn't have a straight edge, it lets the stock be curved in almost any different direction and still sit stable against the sliding saw fence when you're just roughing it to size. So that's a job that Matt would do on his radial arm saw and I would do on my chop saw. But if you have a sliding table saw, you can just throw it up on the table and do it on your sliding saw. And I think that's what those two blocks are for. So they're just to let a waney edge just go where it wants to go.
It's the
but
same
it's
idea
not
of having
gonna,
two pads on the bottom of a table for sitting on an uneven surface, like on a bench foot.
Right. It's going to sit stable as it passes through the blade and not be dangerous. I believe that is at least one benefit of those blocks. And then, just leave them on there for regular crosscuts too. It doesn't hurt you.
No.
It's perfectly
And
fine.
he swears by that sliding table add-on. He loves that thing. And it is pretty smooth.
I don't know. I'm guessing he loves it because there's not a single thing in his shop that he doesn't love.
Yeah.
Right.
He's super careful about
A lot
what
of guys
he
like them. He has
does.
one. You said Craig Thibodeau has one.
Greg Thibodeau has a full-on sliding table saw, which is even better because the sliding table's right up against the blade instead of being a distance away from it. But anyway.
Stephen Hammer over in New Britain has a add-on sliding table.
It's a really cool way to work, but that's a topic for a different day, maybe.
All right. Well, I say it's time to head into our first segment of the day, and that's going to be all-time favorite tool of all time for this week, where we sing the praises of our most beloved, cherished
tools. Is it for
tools.
all time or is it for this week?
All time
All
this
time
week.
for
I'm really
this week.
confused.
That's the point.
I know, but it's
No,
It's
I'm
a very
so confused.
declamatory statement. It's an all-time favorite tool of all time.
Right, all time.
Ellipse for this week.
I think it's just a cheap way to do this segment over and over again. But
No,
anyway.
it's because as all woodworkers, your favorite tool kind of changes
Who
from.
let me remind Asa here. Who controls the board here?
That's true. You could pop me down at any time.
What's that? Sorry?
Hello?
Can't hear you? All right.
I'm just going to leave.
So let's go alphabetical this time. Asa.
All right.
What's yours?
So, as a lot of people know that, I think it's true of me, Matt, and Ed, that we all work on our houses quite a bit. Ed's always talking about his house projects, which makes him sad. But I know Matt works on his house a lot. So I for one, am just as likely to be working on my house as I am on furniture. And I actually, God forbid, like both of those things equally. So when I thought about my all-time favorite tool of all time
For this week.
I was thinking, what do I reach for the most? So it might not be the most glamorous, clever, woodworky thing ever, but it's the tool I grab the most. And it's right here for those of you watching the video show, and I know you all have one. It is the humble ratcheting screwdriver. And if you don't have one of these, you need to get one of these. But I love how funky these things are. Like mine has like a motorcycle handle grip on it. But it's the thing I reach for most. And just to give you a little bit of extra pop for your dollar here in this podcast, I'll give you a little tip. A lot of people try to drive screws. They get caught up with, once you get a cordless drill, they get caught up with driving every screw in the shop with a cordless drill.
Yeah.
But in a lot of cases in woodworking, that's really a bad
Overkill.
idea. Yeah, and you could start the screw that way, but a lot, especially if it's a screw that's going to show or a screw I'm really relying on, almost always finish it by hand. And this is the guy that I do it with. My motorcycle grip.
So that
ratcheting.
reminds
Here's
me
what it sounds like.
So that reminds me of one of my favorite tools that I tried to steal from my father when my parents retired and moved to Florida and became old.
Yankee screwdriver?
The Yankee screwdriver.
Yeah.
I love those
Is
things,
that
man.
the one that you push on and it
push in
spins?
one and it just goes brrr, screw in. They
My-
are so cool.
Not to get off on a tangent, but
Yeah.
my favorite Yankee tool is the apple peeler.
Those are pretty neat.
Come on, that's
Those are
at
really
least as
neat.
good.
I would agree with that.
All right.
A lot less
Matt,
useful in the shop.
Matt, what's your favorite Yankee tool?
Ingenuity.
I was gonna say some person, but
Yeah, don't.
I'm not gonna do that.
A Yankee fan? Anyway. go ahead.
Yeah, I like Yankee screwdrivers. My dad has some, and I'm not waiting around like a vulture, but I will be the first in the garage.
As will I. sir.
Wow.
Afterwards.
That
As
is
will I.
really morbid.
I'm just kidding.
Once the casket closes,
boom,
boom.
I'm gonna lock it down with a Yankee
You know what,
screwdriver.
Dad? It's been a good ride. You've had a good ride. Let's not get greedy.
Actually, I have an author named Tony O'Malley gave me a little screwdriver once that he had. It's a little Yankee screwdriver about this long, and it's permanently a flat tip. And it's ratcheting sort of like that, but it's really small, and it's perfect for tiny little hinges.
Oh.
And he gave that to me because he felt bad about he dropped a cabinet that belonged to Mike.
Wait, so you benefited?
He felt bad about dropping this cabinet that we were using for a prop, and I didn't tell him it was Mike's.
Nice one.
Well, he's gonna know now.
I also love it because neither he nor I were paying attention during the shoot, and we put the hinges on the wrong side of the cabinet. So when you go to Mike's house, the cabinet hangs upside down now because
you and the author not only drop Mike's cabinet, but he has to hang it upside down.
right.
Maybe the dropped area though now is facing up.
I don't remember how we
All
dropped
right,
it. But
anyway.
It's fantastic.
All right. What do you got, Matt?
So my favorite tool of all time this week, I've talked about this before, but I brought it in again because now we're doing video.
Yes.
And it'll be easier to see. And also because this weekend I'm teaching a class at Phil Lowe's school, the Furniture Institute of Massachusetts.
Also not a sponsor.
Also
though
not a
Phil
sponsor.
Will talk.
And we're a box making class. So I was getting this out to pack. And this is a little shooting board that I made for all the small boxes that I make.
Ooh, I like this.
So
This is ingenious. I see it already.
this vertical part goes into my clamp, and it allows me to
Into your vise.
into my vise, so I can clamp it, and it sits a little bit above, so there's plenty of space to use a.
And it looks like you can angle it and level it out a little bit.
Yeah,
Hold
so
it up well to which camera do we want here, Jeff? This one right here.
so when I'm hand planing, I have it kind of like this, and then the last thing I'll do is run a pass with my paring chisel, and then I'll turn it so it's more flat, like that, and run my paring chisel along it. But
Wait, what do you do first, the hand plane or the paring chisel?
Yeah, so when I'm making little small boxes, like this is the start of a box here. I cut these to length, square,
Yep.
and then I come over and it's completely square, and I make the entire miter here.
Oh, wow.
So
With a hand plane
with
to
a hand
start
plane,
with.
it takes like 10 seconds,
And
and
then-
just quick
Yep.
like that, and then just take a paring chisel and just run it over, and it gives you
Now, how do you maintain
even
perfect,
better.
consistent lengths?
because they're already cross cut to length, and
Okay.
they're all the right lengths.
You're
right?
just going right up until you hit that bottom face.
You go right up until you hit that bottom corner.
Yep.
And then, so why the paring chisel at the end? That gives you an even better, more accurate surface
well,
than the hand plane?
no, but usually a hand plane, except when it's just been sharpened, it will have little nicks or something in it. So there going to be little tracks.
Wow.
And even a small little track that you can barely feel when you put the miter joint together
Yeah.
will cause it a little bit of space.
You are the box master.
So paring chisel I can always keep nice and sharp with no tracks.
So this is how you're able to get those perfect miter joints. Those little box miter joints like these ones that Matt has are really deceptively difficult to get to nail. Like if you try to nail those off your table saw, it's so hard
Yeah.
to get them right.
Yeah, I mean, I can get really good miters off my table saw, but a small box like this, like if you're trying to miter that on your table saw,
Nah, forget it.
it's just you either have to make a special jig to clamp it down,
Yeah.
or you put your, some other way to hold it down, and it's
I
just
just
not,
hold them by hand, with that, and I just push them through there by hand. And sometimes
while your fingers are short.
sometimes I end up in the hospital, but most of the time it works.
Just hold them up to a belt sander at an angle.
One thing
Done.
to point out is that I added this Destaco style clamp so that I can just clamp things down and not
Nice.
have to
That's
hold
cool.
them in place, and then just hand plane and clean it up like that.
How many shooting boards do you own? Because you love yourself a shooting board.
Well, I have that one, which technically is some kind of shooting
Yeah.
board. I have 2 normal shooting boards that
Right.
I keep around right now,
Okay.
and I think that's it.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm disappointed. I thought you would have 9 or 10 shooting boards.
Why do you need that many?
I don't know. I just wanted to ridicule you, and now I can't. So move on.
And actually, I have one that I use all the time, and the other one was just sort of I just replaced it, but I still keep it around because it's still in good shape.
Yeah.
All right. I don't have one this week.
You
Yeah.
don't?
No, I don't have. I've been I've been running around preparing videos.
You
and
haven't
whatnot,
been into
so.
that crap shack furniture place you go to all the time and find your used tools?
No, I've been wanting to go because by now it's been a couple months and he's probably got like a new dump truck full of old tools that I need to go through. So
It reminds me of something I thought of earlier today. I don't know if I can say this on the podcast, but
We'll edit it out. Go ahead. Give it a whirl.
Mike loves arts and crafts furniture, and it's not exactly my
Yeah.
favorite. I'm going to start referring it to as farts and craps.
Or arts and farts.
stay classy, America.
Yeah.
All right. From
Okay,
Kyle.
we have our first edit.
From
That'll be
Kyle.
the first time something I've said.
Is there a practical difference between a low-angle bevel-up plane versus a high-angle bevel-down plane that have the same effective cutting angle? Usually, low-angle planes are block and jack planes, and most smoothers have high-angle frogs. Besides that, is there a difference when it comes down to cutting the fibers of the wood? Oh, yeah.
Matt,
Yeah.
Talk about minutia.
The way that
I think you know more about this than me, Matt.
the way I interpret this question is, or the way it should be interpreted,
This is going to be not helpful. It'd be so much better if you just answered the question, but go ahead.
is if I use plane A, which is low angle with a high angle on the bevel up blade, is the surface that it leaves any different than the surface left by a standard bench plane?
And I would say, is the performance any different? The way it feels to use it and the success you might have, et cetera.
Yeah, in my experience, the answer to question 1, which is the most important question, the surface left by either plane, there's no difference.
9.
So in that regard, all the rest of it in some is just academic.
In my experience, bears that out.
Yeah, there would be some differences in how the 2 planes operate in
Yeah.
some regard. Like, for example, the higher a blade is bedded, the greater. If you were to change the depth adjusters the same amount, rotate them the same amount,
Yeah.
a blade that is pitched higher would go deeper, create a deeper cut than one that's pitched lower, the same amount of travel. That's just, it affects things like cambers have effects.
If you camber,
and-
if you curve the blade and then you picture lying that curve down at a lower angle, I suppose it would be less extreme. And as you tip it up, it becomes more extreme.
Yeah, although I cannot fathom why you would camber a bevel up plane.
Mm-hmm.
I think some people have.
Mm-hmm.
I know one guy once proposed an article about a whole thing about the geometry of bevel up planes that are cambered and all this stuff, and I was just like,
Well, I mean, the same reason you'd camber, you're just going to, maybe not a full camber, but certainly if you're just, these are subtle differences. So if you're just easing the edges a little bit, the corners a little bit, so you don't get pronounced tracks, I think that's going to be pretty similar in both planes.
I've not, in my experience, bevel up planes, I've not had a problem with tracking like you do with bevel down planes for some reason. And I'm not too interested in knowing why.
Oh,
but
it making tracks?
yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah, and creating tracks. And there are other things that technically are different between the 2 planes and why they cut and how they cut and all this stuff. But really, ultimately, the question is, does it make a difference in the surface? And it's like, if your blade is sharp and they're identical, more or less, it's fine. They're both going to work. And that's the final, that's, for me anyways, that's what I care about.
Mm-hmm. I've heard some people, like, I think if you ask Mike, who he'd say for just a general smoother, there's something about the action of a beveled down blade and it being bedded at a full 45 that he likes a little bit better, just for pure smoothing.
I do too. It has something to do with the way that it moves across the wood. Mm-hmm.
Effectively, probably, and we don't have to get into all this, but the blade on a bevel down, you can sharpen it at a lower angle on a bevel down plane, so you could be at sort of 27, whereas if the bevel is up and the bed of the plane is at 12, you'd have to sharpen at 33 to get to 45, and a blunter tipped blade is going to operate subtly differently than one that's a little bit more acute. But these are all very subtle differences that only a super experienced hand plane person would even sense or be aware of. So the truth is, they're all good. It used to be that manufacturing was tough with a bevel up plane because it's because of the way the blade is sitting. If you get anything wrong in the machining of that bed because it's lying down so low, you can end up with there's a lot of downward pressure on that blade, and you can end up getting a kind of a bouncy effect. But that's been solved by the high-end plane manufacturers. So the truth is, I think what we're saying is get what you want. One thing I think that's a little overblown is, Matt, is how they're always talking about how, well, just get a bevel up plane and then you can put all these different blades into it and use it for high angle, low angle, all these different things. To me, once I get my blade in the plane and it's set up and it's cutting well, I hate changing it out. I hate even pulling it out to sharpen it, but completely pulling it out and changing it for a different blade, I'm not so sure that's something that I would really want to have to do on a regular basis.
I was skeptical of that too, but I recently bought a second blade for my low angle block plane.
Yeah.
And with an adjustable mouth block plane. And I have one that's at, sharpened at 27 degrees.
That's the sound of the audience. Hey, this is good stuff, Ed. You can will someone pot Ed down, please?
That's right. Pot yourself down.
Go ahead.
And then I bought a second blade, which I sharpen at 32 degrees, which gives me 44. And I use that for smoothing the sides of little boxes.
Yep.
And I actually found that I do switch out the blades so that I can do in-grain or that. And it also means I always have two sharp blades. So
ooh, that's nice. You don't have to go over and sharpen.
Right. Yeah, I actually have two blades for my number 4 as well, and I always keep them both sharp.
So I guess the truth is there's no bad answer here.
Not anymore. As long as you buy a good plane. But he was asking, well, no, the answer to his question
there's
is...
no practical difference.
Sure, there's differences.
So subtle.
In the experience at this table, at least.
But in what matters, the finished surface,
right?
There's no difference. So just...
All right, Ed, wipe up that puddle of drool and let's move on.
Yeah, if anybody notices me blowing my nose, I pop myself down every time because I've got terrible allergies. So those of you watching the video...
It's true.
I implore you, please, forgive me.
I sit next to Ed, and it's pretty straight up disgusting.
It's gross.
All right,
wait a minute. I might be discovering the allergy here.
Oh, he's allergic to me.
He might be allergic to you.
All right. The next question came from Larry. And Larry wrote that I might do a little bit of paraphrasing here because it's a long question, but he's got a general cabinet saw, and he recently realized that the miter slot and blade were out of alignment with one another. And it's one of those maintenance jobs that he hates to tackle because it's kind of a pain. So he tackled it one night. He had the blade alignment perfect. It measured exactly 0 on his dial micrometer from front to back of blade. I checked it several times to be sure. The next evening, he proceeded to finish the saw tune-up and decided, I'm just going to double-check my alignment. It was out by 0.005 to 0.006 of an inch. He went through the whole process again, had it within 1,000th, and the next day, guess what? It was out again. I know that the bolts were all very snug when I was done. I checked the alignment several times before closing the shop. What gives? So
I like that he says, no one else has access to my shop.
That's right.
As if some elf is coming in to...
Yeah, like his wife is going down
That
there
would
at
be the
night.
best trick to play on a woodworker. Is just come in at night and knock the angle just off 90 on all his tools, like the miter saw, the table saw, everything. You could just torture that person for years. Anyway, so somebody do that and then write in.
I sent this question to Raleigh Johnson, otherwise known as Roland Johnson, and because I was curious as to his take on it, and he ended up being really kind and actually calling Larry, but I wanted to get to the bottom of this mystery.
That's amazing. Like, he actually called this guy and
Yeah.
he worked with him on the phone. That's awesome.
I mean, it's not going to happen all the time, so don't get your hopes up, people.
Right.
Yeah, but I'll give out Raleigh's home phone number at the end of the show.
555-5555.
5555.
Anyhow, so a couple things from Raleigh. First of all, he wondered if Larry was perhaps being a bit too fussy with his tolerances. I mean, Raleigh basically said, look, I like to get it dead on, but if I'm within 0.005 of an inch, he's like, a couple thousandths, he's like, I'm okay with that. But there are a couple things to look out for here. There were probably, Raleigh talks about how this is a cabinet saw, so you've got, a series of bolts, like 4 bolts that bolt the table saw top to the cabinet base, right? So he's tweaking that alignment of the saw top, and each one of those bolts has a lock washer, right? And Raleigh commented that as those lock washers age, when you start to then, you get it into position, then you start to ratchet it down, that can cause that tabletop to shift. This is what we were talking about in our pre-show meeting. That can cause that tabletop, as the bolt gets snugged in, to shift ever so slightly. So first thing he said was, change your lock washers, okay? The other thing is use a torque wrench and follow the torque specifications of the manufacturer, because bolts are actually, as per Raleigh, bolts are actually designed to stretch a little bit once you get to that torque tolerance, and that keeps things that much more, that keeps things that much more taut. So he said, torque it up to the proper tolerances, and don't over torque, because that can lead to a bolt snapping and getting, too stressed out. The other thing he said was if you have an overseas manufactured saw, a lot of times the bolts they're using to secure that top are pretty cheapy-deepy, and they're going to stretch too much and continue to stretch. So he said, go out and get some high-quality bolts.
Yeah, go to your home center or whatever and just
get
replace
something
the bolts.
good and replace
That's
those
cool.
bolts.
So you could replace the lock washers and bolts. That is the first thing that we thought, is something about as the guy does that final snug down, things are shifting a little. And I've had that happen.
In
you can
different
chase it.
instances, a variety
Yeah, you
of
can
things.
chase it around. So that's a cool tip, is like change out your lock washers and your bolts, and maybe this problem will go away. But that is a little bit of a tricky thing. In case people don't understand, on a cabinet saw, the whole blade assembly is attached to the actual cabinet. So when you're trying to get your miter slots and your table aligned with the blade, you're actually shifting the table around on top of the cabinet. Whereas for smaller saws, you have to reach under the saw and actually adjust the attachment points where the blade assembly bolts up under the table. It's called the trunnions. But anyway, so we've talked about that a million times too. But that was interesting.
I can't tell you how many times I've called Raleigh with questions about things, and they could vary from woodworking to cars to life. And his answer invariably is always, change out your lock washers.
I know, it's weird, and I'm talking about my marriage,
Right.
and it's still
Change
about
out your lock
bolts
washers.
and lock washers.
Yeah.
He's a gearhead.
Yes.
Raleigh,
yes.
Raleigh's one of those guys that knows a little bit about everything.
Yeah, and a lot about nothing.
So I say we head into our second segment of the day, and that's going to be one that we have not done in probably over a year, and it's called Road Stories. And these are just that. These are weird or funny or wacky stories from the road. So fine woodworking editors travel a lot to cover articles, and once in a while, madness ensues on the road. So I know that Asa has one.
Yeah, I was thinking of a guy kind of
start with you.
All right, I was thinking of a guy kind of for sad reasons, because his sister wrote us a letter, and about 3 or 4 months ago, and unfortunately, it got discarded before I had a chance to write her back. But it was sad. It turns out that her brother, I guess it was his sister, her brother, like a year ago, had passed away. But I had visited this guy I won't say his name, but he was in a really small town in Missouri, I think. And one of the things about us being on the road is woodworkers don't tend to be in big, booming metropolises as much as they do just in the middle of who knows where, because it's not the most lucrative profession.
Really?
And it's down to earth people who do this hobby. So for whatever reason, we end up, and it was this. So I went to go visit this guy. He was doing an article. All right, this will help you sort it out. He was doing an article about how to use a molding plane. And I went to go visit him, and I was really sad to hear that he passed because he was just the sweetest, nicest guy, but troubled. And he, first of all, I showed up in this little town that was one of those little Midwestern towns that sort of time has forgotten. Mm-hmm. And that was charming in itself. And then he was such a character. He suffered from depression and just different things that went on, but he was the sweetest, nicest guy, and he owned an antique store. And he was living in his own antique store. So that's where he was actually living. So by day, you could come in there and look around. But by night, he was sleeping on one of the beds, using one of the dressers.
Way.
And that was his whole living space. And his shop space was like in this tiny hallway. So you'd never know it from the shots. But this is another thing that happens on the road. We have to shoot in wild, weird places. And there's a way to shoot stuff. But anyway, so we went out to dinner. And he also dressed a little bit different. He was marching to the beat of a different drummer. And he was wearing this like almost like a dance shirt with like a torn open collar and stuff, and like a puka bead shell necklace and everything. When we went out to dinner,
far out
in
man.
This little town, and everyone was just looking at us, and I kind of think they thought we were partners, like partners. And I was like, whatever, I don't care if they think we're partners. And so we went in and had dinner together, and then we left. But I just remember him as being a really troubled but super, super sweet guy who lived in a wacky place in a weird little town. And you meet these people, and he was the sweetest guy. And I was sad to hear that.
We've established that.
Yes, and I was sad to hear that he passed last year. But anyway, that's just kind of interesting people you meet on the road. When you get off the plane and go drive somewhere, you just don't quite know what you're gonna run into.
Yeah, I've heard, Asa, that guy, he was really sweet. Is
Yeah.
that true?
Yeah, he's a really nice guy. I'm feeling a little bit sad about him, that's all.
Yeah.
Well, I have one that is not actually mine, but it is one of the most epic road stories that I have come across here. And I'm not going to say which editor this happened to or what author. We're going to keep that all anonymous. But there was or is or something or other an editor here at one point that traveled to photograph an article and was busy setting up.
Well, you want me to tell it?
not
I actually
say where.
know the story.
So do I. But go ahead. Don't say where it was or anything like that.
Well, it was out in the middle of an expanse. So,
There you go.
out in the middle of nowhere. And the author had lots of water bottles all over his shop.
Water bottles.
Yes, that's what
odd.
it was, water bottles. And
Interesting.
so the editor had to keep moving the
Full or
water
empty?
bottles, both.
Huh.
Moving the water bottles to get them out of the shots. And the author would very passive-aggressively move them back as soon as he could. So there was like this sort of power struggle going on over these water bottles. And at one point, the editor was doing something with the camera bag or the light kit case, and was so sort of kneeled down, working in that, and looked up.
Uh-oh.
And the guy was standing there, and I believe it was at the end of his bench, and most of his body was exposed outside the end of the bench.
Uh-oh.
But behind the bench was a certain part of his body, and he was urinating into a water bottle.
Into a coffee can.
In a coffee can, something like that. And
it was like a power move. It's like,
So what?
I'm going to pee right in front of you
what?
into a can.
But why? This is what
I want to say for the
Why is he
record
recycling
that
this
when this
stuff?
person headed out on this shoot,
Yeah.
I've been on a lot of shoots, and you're getting to know these people before you ever meet them. And he had sent in a picture of him with a certain hat looking like he was a director of a certain type of films that I won't say.
Boy.
He just looked like
A little skeevy?
it was just the way he was looking sideways at the camera with this hat on, and it was his personal profile picture. It struck me as being really weird, and I was like, this guy seems like a weirdo, I said to the editor at the time. And the editor afterward was like, oh my God, how'd you know? I don't know what it was, like a sixth sense, but after you've met so many different strangers, you start to get a feeling about who's going to be a handful or whatever.
Two things. First, I give it up to the editor who this occurred to, because I would have been gone. That happens.
Yeah.
See you later. I'm on a plane back home. Number two.
Well, you
was it
can't.
ever-
Can you really do that?
in that situation?
I mean, you got to get the shots. You got to come home. You
Here's
got to
the-
do your thing.
Here's the second question.
I don't know. I
Did
think-
we ever find out why that was being done?
It's
Like,
a pop.
No. What are they doing with those bottles?
Oh, with the water bottles?
With
Oh, he
the,
was just
the
drinking
contents
water,
of
I
it.
think.
No, the contents of the water bottles.
I don't know, dude.
Anyhow.
I actually have a lot of stories about odd restroom facilities, but not personal, that I've heard from other editors that through the years that you run into, you meet some editor, someone that used to work here, and you end up talking, and I've heard crazy stories about people at shops in remote areas and what they would do. I know one guy, his shop was adjacent to his house. And so to have a restroom in the shop for some reason, he just ran he put a Y junction in the
it's like a porta potty.
in the
Oh, no.
out pipe for his house.
Yeah.
And then it just ran up through the wall into a shop, and he had a little screw-on cap, and he would
come
just
on.
unscrew the cap.
Oh, you don't want the sewer gases coming in, yeah.
This is what happens when men are left to their own
Yes,
devices.
exactly. Clearly not with women.
Yeah.
No, definitely not.
Well, I have some stories, but most of the stories I would want to tell on air, I don't think I want to say, are all good stories. Because when we travel, lots of wonderful things happen too. I've had cases where I sit down to eat, and when we travel, we're by ourselves, so I usually end up sitting at a bar in a restaurant, and I've had people sit down next to me, strike up a conversation, and it turns out they read the magazine and they love the magazine, and that's happened. I've also had an opportunity to do wonderful things like go backpacking in the Wasatch Range, or not backpacking, but hiking in the Wasatch Range with Chris Gochner. Or I've been snowshoeing in the Wasatch Range by myself during the winter.
Yeah.
Great things like that, or go fly fishing in Maine when at the end of the day, because the sun's up for so long.
It's interesting you say you stipulate fly fishing the end of the day, because I was getting emails and text messages from
Yeah.
them at 11 a.m.
And all your photos happened over the course of just 1 hour from 9 a.m. to 10
Right.
a.m.
Yeah, this
well,
is a lot. Here.
I've gotten really good at photography, so
Yeah.
I knock it out fast, and then I spend the better part of the day fishing.
Yeah.
So there's actually a lot of great things. Usually great things happen when you go on the road,
Yeah.
Yeah.
not...
Matt bringing it back home here.
But there was that time that I went down to Greg Palini's, and I showed up, and he was wearing underpants on the outside of his pants.
That didn't happen.
That did not happen. All right. Well, let's
yeah. One thing
What?
about my buddy Greg.
Yeah.
Greg loves cheesy bacon fries a little too much.
How do you know that?
It's almost unnatural. Because he often orders cheesy bacon fries for meals. But there was one time
I've
in
experienced
particular, it was lunch, dinner, lunch. 3 consecutive meals. Cheesy bacon fries at different restaurants.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would love
No,
to
he
see
lo-
the
he knows
inside
what
of
he
his
likes.
arteries.
There's even one place that he and I go to all the time called Bogart's, this restaurant in Waynesville, which is good. And we show up one day, and I'm like, Greg, they don't have cheesy bacon fries on the menu anymore, and they didn't. He
He's
goes,
like, we're out.
We're out
no,
here.
he said, don't worry about it. And the waitress comes by. He says, hey, can y'all make me some cheesy bacon fries? And she was like, sure, honey. And,
Yeah.
like, dial them up.
I always have a hard time eating whenever I've gone to Greg Palini's neck of the woods, because everything down there, it's like every restaurant is named like, Fat Buddies or Piggly Wigglies.
Well,
or
there's
it's like,
Fat
I cannot
Buddies.
Eat.
Fat Buddies is the barbecue place, and that's good.
Yeah.
Bogart's is good. But yeah, there's a lot of heavy foods down in the south.
Oh, my God. All right. Sorry, folks. I've got a bad cable on my mic. So let's move on to another question. This one comes from Charles, who writes, what is the best place for a wood shop? Our house has an attached 2-car garage with enough extra room to stage my tools and bench in front of our vehicles, but it would require moving one or both vehicles out to do any work. Pros for this area would be easy loading, unloading of materials, great natural light during the summer when doors can be open. He's in Michigan. And it will be easy to move the shop into the space. Cons are that there's no heat, so it's cold in the winter, the need for everything to be on casters, and having to move vehicles and tools around all the time. Now, the other option is the basement, which so far seems very dry. Pros here would be a more controlled environment, no frozen glue, sharpening stones, or fingers, as well as more available workspace. Cons? Low ceilings, having to move shop equipment downstairs, and transporting lumber and projects through the house and downstairs. I'm also a bit concerned with dust being trapped in that space and finding its way into vents throughout the house. I believe that Mike has his shop in an outbuilding, as does Asa, while Ed and Matt, as does Matt too, while Ed has a shop in a basement setting. Your advice would be greatly appreciated. So,
Well,
let's just
my shop's in the garage.
hash this out. Yeah, yours is a garage shop.
I have a very similar setup to what he's suggesting, except I don't have to move my stuff around. But he forgot the third option,
Yeah.
which is that formal dining room that you're not using ever.
Yeah.
Empty that
one that
out,
everyone has that
and
no
put
one's
a
using.
shop in it. Yeah.
You know, the one of the options he doesn't talk about is using a garage, but dedicating 1 or 2 spaces to the shop, because he has the garage scenario where you're putting 2 cars, or you're putting cars in and out of the space all the time, and that is really challenging. But if you could possibly dedicate 1 or 2 of those parking spaces, or a single car garage on its own, to your shop, then you don't have to slam everything up against the wall every time you move the car in and out, and park and move your car out of the shop and leave it in the driveway every time you want to woodwork. I found that whatever kind of shop you do, the fewer impediments you have to actually woodworking, the better off you're going to be. So if you make it, if half the year it's freezing cold in your shop and you have to wear a coat, your Carhartt out there and gloves to woodwork, or wait for a really inconvenient heater to fire up, or even honestly have to make a wood fire every single time you go to the shop, or have poor lighting, have lighting where you have to move your lighting around constantly in order to have enough lighting. All of those things will make it less likely for you to do woodworking. So basement, he's really good at talking about the basement drawbacks, and the garage, sort of good at talking about the garage drawbacks. But I would say both of those settings can work, but just try to remove as many impediments as you can to woodworking.
I would say, given what he says he'll have to do, I mean, yeah, ideally you just don't park the cars in the garage and you dedicate it entirely to woodworking. But if he can't do that, and some people have spouses where that's not possible,
Yeah,
I tricked my wife into
Me
getting
too.
the whole garage.
me too. Trained her.
I would go for the basement
Me
in
too.
his case, because you don't have to worry about being cold in the winter.
Yep.
So that's one of your impediments gone. And you can get a dust collector
Yep.
and just do a good job of keeping your shop clean, and that's not a problem.
Yeah, I vacuum mine regularly. I keep it very orderly, and that you might want to. You will probably want a dehumidifier down there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you can get one, like I have my dehumidifier, so I don't have to empty it all the time. I have it on top of one of my shop cabinets on the countertop with a hose going right into my slop sink, so I never have to touch the thing. And it's just always on. It's always taking water out of the air.
Dust will migrate, up into the rest of the house.
Absolutely,
and put film all over.
That's the thing. I don't have
place.
forced air, so I don't have that issue.
Well, that's good. Well, it still will, like, to some extent.
I haven't had it.
No? Well, I had that happen before, and I found that when I weather stripped really well around all 4 sides of the door, with like a little threshold thing under it, that helped a ton. And if I had shop shoes, like just Crocs or something that I slipped on when I went downstairs, that helped me not track stuff into the house. I've seen some people put an exterior door at the top of the stairs because that's naturally more soundproof and weather stripped. Things like that. There's ways to soundproof the ceiling down there if you want to get into that. But the garage can be fine. I think one of the main hard things in a garage is if you ever get big, serious machinery, you have the added hassle of trying to get it down the stairs and
I think
Sure.
the
down
glue
the
and
Bilco
finishing
doors and
supply
stuff.
situation is also a pain in the butt.
Yeah,
Because
is
then
it?
it's like, well, I mean, then, as winter starts to set in, you've got to take all your glues and polyurethane cans and all that stuff and move it into the house, into the basement to store it for the winter.
No,
so it
I'm
doesn't
talking about
freeze.
with a basement shop.
Oh, yeah, no. I'm
That's
just
an
trying to make that
advantage, right?
point. Yeah, it's an advantage.
Yeah.
Who wants to deal with that?
Yeah, it's true. If you have a cold garage, that could be a huge pain in the butt.
Yeah, my shop during the winter normally around 40 degrees, and it's not fun at all.
Right.
And I would also talk about low ceilings, and the only thing is, 7-foot ceilings,
That can be a pain.
not the end of the world. 5-foot ceilings, obviously a problem.
Yeah.
I have a 7-foot. I've got
Yeah.
7-foot ceilings in my shop, and it's not. It's. I would like a higher ceiling, but it's not a huge deal.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
basement. All right, guys. Listen, that we get lots of comments on our page in the iTunes store. You know the drill. Every week we read a couple. So here it is for this week from Hank in Ohio. Great podcast. I only recently found these podcasts and have listened to them all. I'm now in the same sad position as regular listeners. I have to wait 2 weeks to hear a new one. Great information that has helped me improve my woodworking. I even enjoy the sometimes snarkiness of Matt, the Don Rickles
Matt,
of woodworking.
Matt, you have a fan.
That's right.
Yeah.
From Papa
Just one.
Tecton, top tier woodworking, fantastic information, entertaining, fast paced, encouraging, and well produced. This show is one of the top 2 podcasts on woodworking. I learn something every episode. And with that about wraps it up this week for Shop Talk Live. We'll be back again in 2 weeks on September 11th, 2015 for our next episode. In the meantime, show us a little love by leaving a comment on iTunes, and by all means, click that 5-star rating. Don't forget to send your questions and comments into shoptalk@taunton.com, TAUNTON.com. You can catch the podcast via iTunes, stream it on your computer at shoptalklive.com, or dig us on iHeartRadio. Cheers, everybody. That's it for this week. See you in 2.
See you in 2.